Hey! Welcome back to Zilog and Moto. So in last week's episode, I mentioned that we are going to be taking a look at a shooter. Try to mix things up a little bit. And we are. Sort of. No, I didn't screw up the game lineup again this week by forgetting something existed or trying to do something terribly obscure. It's just I found out after playing this game that it wasn't as much of a standard shooter like a Raiden or a 1941 as much as it's more of a run and gun action game like Gunstar Heroes or Metal Slug. So for this week's game, we're taking a look at a somewhat obscure game for the Master System called Quartet. It's actually really special to me in this channel. Now, Quartet, if you're not familiar with it, is sort of Sega's combination of the movie Aliens with a bit of Gauntlet thrown in. I run a gun game with Gauntlet. How does that work? Well, when I say Gauntlet, I only mean it in the loosest sense, in that it's a four-player action game, hence the name Quartet. And unlike Quartet, when you choose to play as a character, all it really affects is how your character looks. There are no differences to the characters like there are in Gauntlet. So maybe it's a bad comparison, but you get the idea. A year after its arcade debut in 1986, Quartet found its way to the Master System. And although Quartet had been pared down to 2. Interestingly enough, apparently Sega Japan realized this didn't make sense anymore, so they changed the name of the game to Double Target. And honestly, the name doesn't really matter here, other than associated with the arcade title. But the game does remain a two-player game, and any of you familiar with 8-bit scene know there were far fewer two-player games back then than single-player. The reason why I say Quartet is a special game for myself and Zilog and Moto is because Quartet was among 2 Master System games I happened to find at a Goodwill location about, let's say 5 years ago. Could be a little less, I don't remember exactly. But at the time I was only playing current gen games, primarily on the Xbox 360. I'd never owned a Master System, a Sega CD, or a 32X. I'd only experienced them at friends' houses growing up. But seeing those Master System games just sitting there for relatively cheap and with the manuals, something just clicked, and I decided I wanted to start this collection. And at the time, I knew I wanted to do something visually with games, and I dabbled a bit on a personal channel with newer titles, but it wasn't until seeing videos by Pat the English Punk and Metal Jesus that I really think, hey, maybe I should do this and actually put a little effort into it. Have something coherent. Very little effort. So there you go. If I hadn't found that copy of Quartet, a game I'd never heard of before at that point, and to this day, I'm not sure if I've ever seen the arcade machine anywhere, there would be no Zilog and Moto. So, is this game worth a half-page script talking about days gone by? Let's take a look. And this is Quartet, and as usual, it's got one of those early Master System super basic covers with the white cross-hatching. I suppose I should shut up and just get used to these covers being bad, because they're all like this until like 1999 or so. But how does a console that's graphically better than the NES, pretty much in all regards, gain a poor reputation amongst kids? Well, besides the fact that you couldn't play Super Mario Brothers on it, all these covers look like ass. This picture of Mary and Edgar looks as if it was drawn by the kids they were trying to sell the cartridges to. And you couldn't tell at all that they tried to make Mary look Ripley-esque in the game, to go along with the alien killing theme. And never mind the fact that having 2 characters on the cover makes keeping the name Quartet even sillier. But I digress. Complaints about the cover aside, the case is in pretty good shape. But just a minor mark around Edgar's head. Let's see if we can kind of see it right there. Like someone used the case to, right on top of something. There is a little bit of a chunk missing there, but for the most part everything else is intact, and including the hang tab. In fact, the hang tab is stiff. It's like it's never been bent whatsoever. The back cover shows pretty much a standard Master System layout, with the 2 screenshots up here at the top, and then down below a description of the game. And, I gotta say, if you actually read through this description here, it makes the game sound pretty interesting. So at least they got that part right. As we open it up, you see the usual Master System cartridge.
intact, in pretty good shape. I mean, there's a little bit of wear on the front of the cartridge, but other than that, it looks, the label's on there. It's not peeling off or anything. And then look over here. It looks like I've got 2 copies of the manual, right? Well, no, wrong, wrong. So if we look a little closer here, yeah, that's just the outer cover. That's not the actual manual. This here is the full manual. So remember how I mentioned earlier that collecting this game kickstarted me collecting all these games? Well, I think this was part of that. When I bought this game from Goodwill, I thought it had the manual because when I opened it up, this was in here. And then later on when I got home, I found out that obviously it was only the front cover. So it really made me want to get the full thing. So I think I went to eBay and got a replacement manual for it. I mean, I would have had to have. I don't know where else would have gotten one from. Which is what you see here. It's in pretty good shape. It's a little crinkled, as some of these get, but it's intact. The manual is actually really good, and because of that, I'm going to complain about the cover again. So take a look here on page 4. Now check out that drawing. That's Mary and Edgar there. All right, now compare Mary and Edgar there to Mary and Edgar there. Which of those two looks better? So they had this art ready to go. It was available. They could have used it, and yet they went with this instead. I just, who is going to think that this is better than this? Anyone? Anyone at all? Yeesh. All right, the menu has also a nice drawing here of all the different aliens in the game. Which is good because the reference by name later on in the manual for the different strategies and tips. Let's see if I can show right here. Yeah, like right here it says, shoot the top Maybach and the star power will appear. Like, well, what the crap's a Maybach? I was like, oh, well, you can just go back and look here and like, oh, well, that's a Maybach. Okay, so I just have to look for that in a level. But, also, at the end, there's a lot of nice, again, for this screen here, it's nice. This makes the mysterious stars appear, like how you do that. Otherwise, you would never figure this out. And then here, this page here that shows the number of shots you need to destroy the end-level bosses. This is just really nice information to have in a manual, especially back in 1987. There's also information in there about, how to level your character up and, other stuff like that. That, again, you just, if I was operating on only this front cover, I would never know. So really glad I was able to pick that up and, finish the full copy here. And again, for that tip information, I think it's really cool that Sega put that in the manual. That's the kind of thing that, if we were talking Nintendo here, they'd force you to get that stuff from, say, Nintendo Power or calling the 1-800 number or something like that. Okay, so some well-deserved bitching and some praise so far. So let's see if the actual game causes the review score to teeter one way or the other. As stated previously, Quartet is based on the 1986 4-player run-and-gun arcade game of the same name, but now pared down to 2 players, with characters Lee and Joe completely excised from the game. Mary and Edgar remain, and play exactly the same, with player 1 getting Mary and player 2 getting Edgar. A quick note about that is that the game is a true 2-player game, and not a game where you're simply taking turns or passing the controller back and forth like certain other 2-player games. Having 2 players available at the same time definitely makes the game more fun, and is notable as there weren't tons of 2-player simultaneous action games back then. The game begins with you running on the surface of Colony Number 9, and similar to many platform action games, you must run and jump over holes in the ground, or else instant death occurs. Available to help you make it through the levels easier is a jetpack. The jetpack allows you to fly over any gaps, avoid sections with enemies that you don't want to deal with, and also usually make it much easier to fight the level bosses. And in some cases, if you lose your jetpack in a level at a point where you can't jump back to, you might be better off just restarting the game. Yes, it makes that much of a difference. I almost wish the game consisted entirely of flying around and shooting the enemies, but that would be a different game. Without the jetpack, the platforming controls are a bit stiff, but it doesn't make the game unplayable. There are other eccentricities to deal with, though. In certain sequences, you'll jump up on platforms close to the top of the screen. However, in doing so, you have to be careful about when you jump off of those platforms, because there's an invisible ceiling that you can bump into, causing you not to jump as far as you'd planned. One other issue is that while the game revolves around you being able to shoot to defend yourself from the alien horde, you can only shoot in two directions, left or right. Or more technically, you can only shoot in the direction your character is facing. In a platformer where you have enemies coming at you from literally every direction, instead, feels a bit unfair. Having the jetpack evens this out a bit. It makes the game feel more like a horizontal shooter, but even then, having enemies be able to come at you from above or diagonally and not be able to shoot up at them takes a considerable amount of getting used to. Those aliens are part of where the game shines, however. In a lot of 8-bit titles, and even some not as good 16-bit titles, you end up killing the same enemies over and over and over again. Maybe they'll change colors, maybe there'll be a mix of 3 or 4 to keep things interesting, but for the most part, enemies being repetitive and boring is a common problem. Not in Quartet. Think back to that page from the manual with the detailed drawings of all the enemies and their names. They all appear in the game, and they all look different, and they all have different behaviors. You're talking 18 different enemies, plus the various level bosses. That's pretty incredible for a game from 1987. Those different enemy behaviors are why it's a bummer that you can effectively only shoot in one direction, but it definitely keeps the game interesting. My only issue with enemies specifically is the respawn rate, which in most cases is very high. If you manage to kill an enemy to clear a path in a level, it'll be replaced with a point ball, which, as you guessed it, gives you points if you collect it. But that also clears the local area for the enemy to respawn, so you have to move quickly. In an area with lots of enemies, sometimes it's better not to collect the points, and just let the point ball sit there in place of the enemy for a few seconds to give yourself time to maneuver to the next one. This seems like poor design to me. I'm okay with the concept of enemy respawns, but I think there's better ways to handle it, such as waiting for the character to be off screen, etc. The bosses are larger and more detailed than any of the other enemies, but they aren't too difficult. And while they don't necessarily have a specific pattern, they do have tendencies that you can pay attention to get past them. And the manual even has a page detailing how many shots it'll take to kill them, depending on if you're in 1 or 2 player mode, which I don't think I've ever seen before. Maybe Sega felt it was necessary to let people know that they were more difficult with 2 players. I don't know. But the info is helpful, as even something like Contra isn't like that to my knowledge. In fact, the only games I can even think of off the top of my head that are like that are the Borderlands series. Although I'm sure there's others. It's just definitely less common. The sound of the game is decent. Quartet isn't one of the Master System titles that benefits from the optional FM module, but even without it, the music is nice and upbeat, and there are different tracks for each of the levels, along with the opening music and the end of game music. There aren't very many sound effects in the game, mainly just your character shooting, some minor explosions, and then the effect when you die, but for an old arcade port, that's about all you need. Every now and then I did experience audio dropouts, where it seemed like the music dropped in favor of a sound effect, and then started right back up, but I couldn't tell if it was a bug or if it was just the game telling the Master System to do a little bit too much. For 1987, the graphics in the game are pretty good, with the only issue I witnessed being a little flicker every now and then, when too many things need to be drawn on the screen at the same time. But that's a common issue with the Master System, and it's just going to happen from time to time. I already mentioned how all 18 of the common enemies look and act different, along with the bosses, but beyond the enemies and your characters moving around the screens, the backgrounds of the levels are interesting as well. Maybe not the most detailed backgrounds I've ever seen, but starting on the second level, each has 2 sections, referred to as the surface world and the underworld. Each of those sections has different art and layouts, so it's essentially like having 11 levels in the game instead of just 6 from a graphics standpoint. The game isn't terribly long, but the look of the game always stays interesting. I don't know why they chose those designations, Surface World and Underworld, as it's not like the backgrounds represent the surface of the planet, like in the first level, versus some cave areas. Usually it's more like different rooms inside a large building that connect via doors. But those different rooms, so to speak, each look different and have different enemies. For instance, the level exit may be in one room, but the yellow star and key to open the exit may be in the other one, so you'd have to thoroughly explore both to learn where everything is. Of those 6 levels, by default you can only play the first 5. To get to the 6th level, you have to find 5 large gold stars, 1 per level. In levels 1 and 2, it's pretty obvious where the stars are, but by the time you reach level 3, they start to become hidden and easy to miss if you don't know where to look. Also, you don't need to find the star to complete the level, adding to the potential confusion. However, this is where having the manual comes in handy. If you remember earlier, the locations of the stars in levels 2 through 5 are listed as part of the tips provided for the game. Without the manual? Well, I guess you might find out how to trigger them accidentally, or maybe just be able to find it somewhere on the internet, but having these locations listed in the manual makes things infinitely easier. In the end, I'm giving Quartet a 3 out of 5. When I first started playing it, I didn't really understand the health system, and control quirks of gliding along with the jetpack versus struggling on the ground without it were a bit annoying. But with a bit of practice, the game really came together and I started to have some fun. While it's definitely a scaled down arcade port, I think Sega was able to bring the spirit of the original to the Master System, and you can't ask for much more than that on limited hardware.
And that was Quartet, an early Master System game you may not have heard of, but that was released in America, and if you like contra-ish titles, might be worth a look for you. Tune in next week when we get back to the sports side of things. Seeing as how football season's almost upon us again, I'll be pulling out a title from a series we haven't looked at yet, but I don't think I'm going to go with Madden. We'll probably save that for closer to the playoffs / Super Bowl. Wait, am I allowed to say Super Bowl? It doesn't matter. No one watches these things anyway. Ooh, come get me, NFL lawyers, I'm scared. And remember, whatever you play, have fun, and be excellent to each other. Later.